Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. So Richardson Reads just tagged me recently on the History Trail tag, and the History Trail tag is really in the spirit of sort of a hiking trail, and then sort of your journey, your hiking trail journey themed journey through history and historical fiction reading. This tag was originally created by the novel Nomad, and she did her responses when she created the tag on as she was hiking a pioneer trail. So it's very interesting. I'll link to it below, and I'll also link to Richardson Reads' responses. But I thought it would be really fun to kind of just go through my answers as well. So, we start out our trail with first steps. So what book, movie, person, or place introduced you to history or historical fiction? So I've mentioned on other videos that I'm originally from Arkansas. So here's a map. I'm originally from this area right over here. Don't know if you can see that. Right over here, this is the Mississippi River on right here, so kind of near the Mississippi River. But that area of Arkansas is very, was settled by the French originally in like the 17th century. And my grandmother's family actually had immigrated to a French village there called Arkansas Post in the 1790s. And so she was very in tune to that, sense of place. And then my dad was as well. And so that county, the county where I grew up, just had a lot of history. It had that early French history. That town, the Arkansas Post, that village had actually been the first capital of territorial Arkansas once Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Purchase. This was part of the Louisiana Purchase. When it came to the Americans, it then became the Arkansas Territory, and Arkansas Post was the first capital. But then after the Civil War, the town itself ceased to exist, and it's now a national park. But we had a real sense of place, and we went there quite a bit, like for just spending the day or whatever. There was that park, early French history that I was exposed to. There was even a Revolutionary War skirmish there, one of the few west of the Mississippi. There was a couple of Civil War battles fought there. So I was just surrounded by this history. Also, the mound building culture, the Mississippian culture of the mound building Native American cultures was also there. So there were these Native American mounds. We call them Indian mounds. So anyway, I just grew up around in that environment. But my reading, the first sort of historical fiction that I read, that I can remember reading anyway, was this series called the Kent Family Chronicles. This came out in the 70s, and this was a story of a family journeying, through American history. And my little town that I lived in, this was before the internet, was pretty rural. We did not have a bookstore. There was not a bookstore for miles and miles, at least 30 miles or more away. I don't even think the town 30 miles away had a bookstore. And there was no internet. So we're dependent on either mail order or whatever was available in the local drugstore. And this series was in paperback at the local drugstore. And I bought these one by one and read those, and really got into that and did book reports on them for school, etc. And then, my grandmother used to take me to the library, and I remember asking her once, I used to read what they call juvenile fiction, what now they call YA, I think. But I asked her, can I go get books from other places in the library? She was like, sure. So the first thing I went and got was Leon Uris's Exodus. This is a story of the Jewish experience after World War II, and refugees. The refugees were trying to make their way to Israel. I ended up getting so drawn into this, even though I don't come from Jewish culture. I was just so drawn into it. I ended up reading several more of Leon Uris's works, and I don't know if I would recommend them today. The treatment of Arabs might be a little controversial today, but at the time they really exposed me to a different era and a different culture, and my adult reading really just took off after starting to read these books. So Second steps. Number 2, Well-Trodden Path. What is your favorite historical recommendation? Books, plays, movies. Yeah, I think, for my Well-Trodden Path, the thing that I always really go back to is ancient time. I read a lot in really from the Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, through to the end of the Roman Empire. I don't want to say the fall of the Roman Empire. I think historians are trying to get away from that term. But one book I read fairly recently is called, last year, a couple years ago, is called 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. This is technically the end of the Bronze Age. This era, to me, is just so rich. Basically, these cultures that existed around the Mediterranean Sea. I've got another one that I would recommend highly. It's a nonfiction as well. It's called The Great Sea, A Human History of the Mediterranean. I did a book chat on this book, and I'll link to it below. This really tells the story from really Neolithic times through to the present day, the history of all of the different movements of cultures and peoples around the Mediterranean. And to me, that's just, so fascinating. And then a book I read last year, both of those works that I just mentioned were nonfiction, but a work of historical fiction that I read last year that I was really pleasantly surprised by was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This tells the story of the Trojan War, the Iliad, through the eyes of Patroclus and mainly through Patroclus, but Patroclus and Achilles, in their relationship that they had with each other. I was so pleasantly surprised by this. I just really enjoyed that a lot. And then finally, another well-trodden path for me is really prehistoric history. I read this earlier this year, After the Ice. This takes place, it's a nonfiction work that tells the global human story of life from about 20,000 BC, right at the end of the last ice age, the last peak of the ice age, all the way to about the year 5000 BC. So this is nonfiction, like I said, but it's told in a narrative format where we have a traveler who sort of swoops in through time and visits villages all around the world at different places around the world throughout time, from about 20,000 BC to 5,000 BC. So it was just very readable to me. And, while it didn't have the steamy sex of The Clan of the Cave Bear, which I read like 3 of that historical fiction series too, but I think I read the first 3 of that. It wasn't as compelling when it comes to that, but it was nevertheless very compelling, especially for a nonfiction work. So number 3, good boots. So what is your favorite historical fashion era? So yeah, if you're hiking, you're going to need some good boots. So I'm going to go with the Regency period. I love Regency clothes. I love the Regency period. And this is Mr. Darcy. This is Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy. I want this whole outfit. I want to wear this whole outfit. I want the tailcoat. I want the top hat. I want the boots. I want the breeches. I want the cravat. Yeah, I love Regency period. I did for a while. I did country dancing. Went to country dancing with this woman. She eventually ditched me because she was looking for she got interested in another man there, and so I kind of got left without a partner. But country dancing, this whole era of the Regency to me is so fun, and love it. Number 4, close to home. What is a historical read set in your home country? So my home country is the United States. I am from Arkansas, so I am regionally from the South. And so from my region, I think the best known historical fiction work is probably Gone with the Wind. I did read that years ago, and I did really enjoy it. Not too crazy about it right now, just due to it presents sort of a heroic version of the Confederacy that I don't find believable anymore. But at the time, I did go through a time of liking that book. So what I'm going to say though is actually my favorite now is Cold Mountain. Which they made into a movie as well. The book is much better. This is one of those rare books that I read I put it down. I thought about it for a couple days. I picked it right back up and started on page 1 and read it again. So I read it twice. It's just a beautiful tale. If you don't know the story, it's a Civil War era tale. This man, Soldier Inman, goes off to fight in the Civil War. He eventually deserts and starts this long trek home to his beloved Ada, and she's going through a transformation herself because she'd been sort of a spoiled urban woman who was thrown into the chaos of the war and had to struggle to survive. So it's just a beautiful tale. I remember the imagery of the passenger pigeons flying over Inman's head. He looking up and seeing passenger pigeons. Of course, they would eventually all be extinct. And he sits under a chestnut tree, an American chestnut tree, which they also all went extinct. And so it's just to me, it was just a beautiful, melancholic, beautiful read, and I would love to read it again. The Trail Not Taken. What historical eras do you avoid? I typically don't really get into historically from around the end of the Civil War to about World War I, like 1870s to around 1914, 1912 to 1914. I don't know. I just, for some reason, there's a lot that happens in that era. It's the area I'm least drawn to. So I'm not sure what's up with that. Trail maps. What historical reads are on your TBR? So right now I am actually reading, even as we speak, I should be finished with this soon, and we'll have a book chat coming up for it. Let me pull up the cover for you. I'm reading SPQR, which is A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. So this has been real enjoyable and real readable. It's written for the general audience, and so I have that coming up. I also have coming up soon will be the sayings of Musonius Rufus, who was a Stoic. So I love reading about Stoicism too. Speaking of that, what historical person inspires you? Richardson Reeds kind of went over this, inspiration versus interested in. But right now I'm going to say Seneca. The Stoic philosopher Seneca has really influenced me over the last couple of years. I read a book called A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy, a couple of years ago. This is by William B. Irvine, and it really set me off on this Stoic journey, and I since discovered Seneca and his letters, which I love. The other kind of interesting thing about Seneca is he navigated the Rome of his day, Caligula, Claudius, and then finally he was the tutor to Nero, and Nero ultimately was his undoing. But I read this book a couple of years ago, Dying Every Day, Seneca at the Court of Nero. Seneca was ultimately forced to commit suicide by Nero. But to me, it's just fascinating how he was this Stoic philosopher that writes these beautiful essays on the art of living, and yet he was involved in this sort of depraved government of Nero, and very active in the Roman politics. So to me, that's just amazing. But inspiration, I really get inspired by books that are about journey, or people who are on journeys, or seekers who are on spiritual journeys. I like books about, and I'm going to explore this more in my reading list next year, people who are on the outside, willing to just run against the grain, to be themselves and to make change, or to demand the right to be who they are. So I've got some interesting books coming up about that next year, I think. So stay tuned. So yeah, that's it. Number 8 is tag your fellow history nerds. I'm going to make a challenge for if any, my viewers or anybody that sees this video who is a person who's into history or historical fiction to, if you're interested, if you find these questions fun or interesting to do, then by all means do a video. Then leave me a comment below that you've done a video so that I can go and see it. And I'd love to hear your responses. So I'll leave it at that. Until next time, take care. Bye.